Who is going to end up sitting in the Oval Office next year? Is it going to be Vice President Harris or former President Trump? Well, I don't know, but what I do know is the answer to that question is going to depend on not only how many voters turn out, but which voters turn out. And so far, voters just are not turning out the way they did 4 years ago when it was Trump and Biden on the ballot. According to the AP, more than 45 million early in-person votes and mail-in ballots have been turned in nationwide in 2024. Now, 45 million sounds like a huge number, and yes, of course, we still have several more days to go of this early voting period, and yes, of course, some states are seeing a very strong early voting turnout, but overall, the 2024 voter turnout is not even close to what we saw in 2020, when more than 100 million votes were cast either by mail or early in person. Now, keep in mind, in the modern era, 2020 was a record-shattering year. 158 million Americans cast a ballot, which means about 67% of eligible Americans participated in that election. So when you look at voting records since the 1990s, the average voter turnout for a presidential election is more like 58%. So 67% voter turnout is a big difference. Of course, back in 2020, there was a lot going on. We were in the thick of a global pandemic, and early and mail-in voting drove that massive increase in overall voter turnout. According to an analysis by MIT of the 2020 presidential election, more voters chose to vote by mail or early in person by far than voting in person on election day. You could see vote by mail surged to 46%, voting in person early went up to 26%, and voting on election day dropped to 28%, which was radically different than what we saw in 2016 when in-person voting on election day was at 60%. Now, perhaps working against Republicans back in 2020 was the party, led by former President Trump, was really campaigning against early voting and mail-in voting. Instead, Trump was encouraging his supporters back then to go to the polls on election day to cast a ballot for him. But that can be a gamble because things can always happen, and sometimes because of work or personal obligations, voters can't make it to the polls on election day. But it appears that's changing in 2024. While former President Trump is still casting doubt on early voting and mail-in ballots, he is absolutely encouraging his supporters to vote early. For the record, Trump has cast his vote by mail multiple times, and in 2020, he voted early in person. And in 2024, it looks like Republicans are following his lead. State elections officials are reporting that the number of Republicans casting early votes either in person or by mail is definitely up nationwide. According to NBC's Early Vote Center, 40% of Republicans have either voted by mail or have voted early in person, and 42% of Democrats have either voted by mail or early in person. It is neck and neck. So if you want to keep track of not just the presidential race, but all the races for the House and the Senate, make sure you pick up my 2024 election guide. Just follow these easy steps to get your digital download of the book.